Well, I have been the last time in Belgrade 55 years ago. Soldiers were taking me to one refugee camp to the other, but the picture is much more bright because as Mark, I think, said that mentioned the name of Zombor. When as a refugee, I crossed in a night in the Hungarian border because they wanted to jail me. It was in early 1957. I was sheltered for 2 weeks in a kind of camp in Zombor. But it's a family tradition because in my family there was a tradition that my great-great-great-grandfather, who lived in Zombor and who was an officer of the Hungarian Revolution, then after the defeat, the Austrians wanted to defeat him, the Serbians of the city was hiding him in an oven when the Austrian soldiers came. I was also hidden by the Serbians and the Hungarians of Sombor. And, well, I crossed Belgrade with the soldiers 55 years ago. Now I am coming back in a much nicer condition. Thank you. Thanks to Petar, thanks to Mark, and to all of you, because hadn't you come, I could not have come either. So that's very important that somebody comes and pretend to listen to what you are saying. Of course, some people think that the only person really necessary in the lecture is the lecturer. That's what visually people console themselves when very few people turn up. But of course the quality, you are not very important, but the quality must be so high that I am already deeply appreciating your presence. And since you are not too many, even if you get bored, you would not dare to leave so early, squeaking out, because it will be seen. So watch out. And I have been asked to give. Can I be heard? Is it okay? Because my voice is going away. It's a consequence of original sin. You know, according to Catholic theology, it has two consequences: fragilitas and stupiditas. Perhaps this fragilitas means I'm getting a sore throat, but the microphone helps. I'm supposed to talk to you about the problem of the foundation in German idealism. Let me make it clear that I am not trying to take up the issue of very much discussed today generally in philosophy about a question of foundation. I'm not going to come down heavily for foundation or against, even if I am a weaker point for foundation. But that is not the point. I'm trying to explain to you how the things might be operating in German idealism and how it develops within this short period of human history, German idealism. It was not a very long period. After all, the Critique of Pure Reason was written published in 1781. Hegel died in 31. It is true, Schelling went on writing, and it is thanks to Schelling that I am here, right, Petar? We met at a Schelling meeting in Strasbourg, which showed that Schelling was a great philosopher. And the problem of the question of the foundation concerns to the question of how to justify, how to explain, how to legitimate, so to say, existence. It is not enough to say that they are things, that they do exist things, but also we have to understand whether those things have a meaning, whether they are meaningful, whether existence is simply contingent. Philosophy tries to give reasons about things. I think it would be too simplest to say philosophy is a causal explanation. Of course, in an Aristotelian sense, in the four causes it is, but not in the sense of the efficient causation. However, we have to give sense, meaning how things relate to other, how things come out of other things. If it is to say, from the very beginning, from the pre-Socratic philosophers, we have been trying to tell what are the first principles. You know that Thales talked about water, that Anaximenes talked about air, and so on and so on. We are looking after some kind of first principles which try to explain at the same time why things come to exist and what is the meaning of those things. However, this very questioning of the grounding and the founding of existence's meaning is sneaking away and going into another area with the 17th century, late 18th century, 17th century empirism. Because with the empirism, the question of foundation leaves the field proper of ontology and moves to theory of knowledge. Instead of, put it this way, before explaining being, before explaining where existence is, why existence is and how, we have to explain and to justify knowledge. The so-called English empiricism, most of the English empirists were Scottish or Irish, English empiricism began with this feeling, but of course it is with Kant and the post-Kantians that this questioning receives its accomplishment, its fulfillment. In a way, German idealism begins with a kind of radical putting into question the possibility and the limits of knowledge, yet it ends by reasserting, reaffirming in an unheard and unforeseen way the validity and the limits of knowledge. Kant is going to push the question of the foundation from the realm of being into the realm of subjectivity, of the realm of finite subjectivity. And he is working out the great theme of the a priori synthesis, which is making how the subjectivity, human finite subjectivity, does become the principle, the ground of sense and meaning in a finite yet not empirical, not contingent way. Hegel, as you know, tries to integrate the achievement, the results of Kantian critique, but he thinks that contingency and finiteness can be won over and move into what we call absolute idealism, where the form and the content, where rationality and reality become, so to say, identical. Finally, Schelling, the youngest of the idealists, is going to accept, I am mainly speaking now in the second Schelling, accepting the results of the Hegelian deduction, but he thinks that the deduction, the science of logic, is okay, but it can only operate in the ideal domain, in the world of reason. Reason mediates all meaning and all reality in the world. There is one thing it cannot mediate, it is its own existence. Reason must recognize its powerlessness, its radical weakness, indigency before being. And it is only in a second moment, after the humiliation of reason, that Schelling tries to go back and show the meaningfulness of being by explaining how being ex post facto can be understood as God, and God is going to be the principle of meaning more than the principle of being. After this short introduction, when I spelled out the major themes of the talk, and you are still here, I would like to go more into details of my critical study. As you know, everybody knows that Kant was awakened from his dogmatic slumber by the reading of Hume. That is to say, by the Humean criticism of causality and substantiality, which were supposed to be the cornerstone of philosophical knowledge. It is thanks to causality and substantiality that philosophy were supposed to be to talk meaningfully about the natural world and the human world as well. But Hume, as you know, in magnificent text of the treatise on inquiry, tells us in a very splendid and a very eloquent way that substantiality and causality are not pure intellectual, intelligible categories, but are from the world of empirical reality. They are products of this instinct, which is reason. Kant appreciates the position of Hume, but he's trying to go around them and especially to go beyond them. Hume is right. There is no analytical implication of the accident in the substance. There is no analytical implication of all the predicates by the subjects. There are synthetic connections, but in the very way synthesis asks for no newness, in synthesis asks for something which has not been given in the concept, synthesis is going to add to us something unheard of, something not known, and obviously sounds, Hume says, this unheard of, this unknown of, can be only empirical. This thing which does not come out of concept, which is not implied analytically by a concept, which comes synthetically to our mind, is obviously empirical, coming out of the empirical world. Hence, the causality and the substantiality give us knowledge, render us knowledge, deliver us knowledge, but a knowledge which is stained by its limited by its empirical origin. But precisely the Kantian revolution consists in telling us that there is synthesis which is a priori. That is to say, there are realities, they are predicates which are not implied by the subject, yet they are intellectual, they are intelligibly, rationally contained by them. In Kantian philosophy, the a priori synthesis is the copula of the judgment. In the analytical judgments, for instance, when we say the dog is an animal, in this position, the is does not tell us really anything new. The dog is an animal. We simply look at the dog. We peel off the skin of the concept of the dog, and animality is there. The is, the copula in an analytical proposition, is only and sign of identity. It is a third one besides subject and predicate, but that is a third one which has no consistency, no novelty. It's a pass house. It's not a maison de passe, but it is a house. It's a passing. It has no dimension. In the synthetic a priori proposition, something new happens. There is between the cause and the effect, there is a relationship which is not analytically implied by the cause, yet. So it means that I cannot give you a complete exposition of Kant. I suppose it's a transcendental fiction that all of you well, the critique of the pure reason, and you understand that it is thanks to the schemata, thanks to the a priori meaning of time, that from the subject there is a movement to the predicate, a movement which is a true movement, a true novelty, but a novelty which is not simply empirical, but something which is ex post facto understood. In the analytical judgments, which even at the time of Leibniz were the only ones understood as a priori, the copula is simply a kind of sign of identity without any proper content. It's a kind of window. It's a screen, but a provisory screen. You take it off, and the subject and the predicate facing each other and saying, we have always been close to each other. We just had to clarify the things to find out that a subject operates and implies the predicate. In the synthetic a priori proposition, the predicates are not directly, immediately given by the subject, but they are shown ex post facto as belonging to it. The synthesis a priori is in introducing into philosophy thirdness, the sense, a true reality, a true dimension of a third element. There is a true movement from the subject towards the predicate. It is thanks to the schemata of time that the schemata are the structure of time. The subject does not contain analytically the schemata, yet the schemata are a priori grounded by the subject. The relation the Kant thinks that the concept of the cause does not imply analytically the concept of the effect. However, we have of the causal relationship, we have a schema, and a priori schema, we have something in our mind which shows that when I posit something, something else follows upon it. I have this, I cannot show it. We have causality, we know what it is, not only in the world. It is not only that the dog is the cause of the puppets, it's not only that the heavy clouds are the cause of the rain, but because these are empirical examples, but we have in the working of our mind, we have the schema of causality, something in our mind, something which we cannot pin down, something which cannot figure out, yet we have in our mind a kind of movement from A to B, and not a random movement, but a movement which is not only a going towards, but also implies a certain relationship and organical connections between the two. this is the schema which helps us to recognize the affinity, the connection between an a priori connection between the cause and the effect and the substance of the accident. Kant has tried out the a priori synthesis because he wanted to rescue the science of Newton. Newtonian science were in great trouble because of Humean philosophy, because Newtonian science were based upon the relationship of the cause and the effect. And Hume sought to prove that this relationship was simply empirical, simply contingent. But Kant tries to show us that even though there is no pure analytical implication of the effect by the cause, yet the movement from the cause to the effect is rational and a priori. In this way, I am not going to go to the realm of the practical philosophy where also the a priori synthesis is moving, and I am not going to give examples because they are very difficult, but I try to show the meaning. The a priori synthesis allows the philosopher to ground natural science, the validity of philosophical knowledge. Of course, this validity contains only the phenomena, not the noumena. But it's already a great deal to think that we can think of this world. Kantism is not relative. Many critics of Kant thought that Kant was a relativist. He said, it is just appear to us. It does not just appear to us, it appears to all finite mind having a certain structure, time and space structure. Kant has been deeply limiting the realm of reason, yet at the same time, not only in the domain of faith and morals, but even the domain of knowledge, he very profoundly confirmed it, because he said, we don't know how the angels or God or perhaps somebody lives in another other sphere knows about the dropping of the rain or the events of the lava coming out of the volcanoes, but we who will live in this earth, whether we stay here or take a plane or a space engine and move elsewhere, we are always to see the world, and the causality and substantiality are not simply the results of some kind of nice instinctive thing which helps us to get ahead. It's not simply a pragmatical thing to go ahead, but we do know this world. When friends of mine, especially who are metaphysicians and Thomists, say, but after all, the Kantians remain on the surface and they are not interested in the meaning of them. I tell them, do you think that you know things as God does know them? I don't know them. I remember Paul Tillich was walking at Riverside Drive in New York when he was very old. He was a very young man, and he was going, and suddenly he stopped and said, you see this tree? He had a German accent, perhaps almost as bad as mine, and he said, I know how is this tree for me, but I don't know how is it for itself. But I think it's plenty enough to us to know how the tree is for us. It's already a great deal. Philosophy is founded in a way, and reconciled with the physical world by knowing that we are not taking up the perspective of somebody else. As a matter of fact, in a certain sense, ancient metaphysics had difficulties, because after all, in a way, they told us that we know things in a way we could not know, because we are not in a divine or transcendent perspective. So, the greatness to my mind of Kantian philosophy, that Kant, without any way putting into a Nietzschean stance, without rejecting infinity or eternity, he simply says this world is a finite world and the finite subject has a meaning. The finite subject does have a meaning, it's grounding knowledge, it gives meaning, it receives meaning, it is the principle of meaning, and we are again at home in this world, and we can hopefully go ahead prudently, carefully, asking to operate, because the finite subject has found it. Of course, it is much deeper. It's not simply that we can go on. Kant gave an extraordinary apologetics to the finite subject, without being a Promethean position, without going out in the street saying there is no God in heaven and there is nobody else. No, Kant said we human beings know only this, but we know this quite well, and we have something to go ahead. So this foundation by the subject means a victory of the a priori over the empirical, but this empirical is not obliterated, is not dissolved. In a way, it is going to survive within the a priori structure. You know well, or at least you are supposed to know, that there is the sensory manifold, which is the ground of every human knowing. There is an element of non-transparency, there is an element of opacity in knowledge, which we can move around, like in the mountain. When we can, the path goes, we can go up the mountains, but not to any path. We have to go around, and that is we have to do. But the post-Kantian idealist has the high ambition to suppress, to destroy, to obliterate all kinds of heterogeneity, and to do away with any limitation of knowing. Fichte, as you know, I'm not going to talk about him out of the book, Fichte is trying to generalize the domination of the subject on the world, and Hegel, who certainly in many ways has been the most perfect of all philosophers, decided to a priorize the entire reality. With the genetical method, first, in the earlier part of his work, in the phenomenology, Hegel is using the genetical method. What does it mean? It means that normal human beings think that they receive knowledge which comes out of experience, and between two moments of knowledge there is a kind of a hole, there is a darkness, there is a discontinuity. Hegel says that we simply forgot how we move to A to B. Every moment of experience moves rationally to another, and if we take up a perfect genetical method, if we go back trying to use good intellectual method, we are going to see that the information which we receive from the world is not falling upon us from without in a contingent way, that they are not holes, lacks and discontinuities between two modes of the consciousness, but there is a continuity. It is a genetical method. Kierkegaard is right, Hegel is generalizing anamnesis. The result is that in the phenomenology of the mind, all the contents of consciousness are deduced, they are shown as not simply fallen randomly in the consciousness, but they are going from one to the other. And as you remember, the greatness of the phenomenology of the mind, of spirit, this thing is better than spirit, is to show that in the same way as individual consciousness has a genetical continuity, a foundation on the past moments, the history of mankind, the history of the spirit, the history of social realities, also this kind of a priori continuity. There is a foundation of consciousness, but after the phenomenology, which has been the last monument of transcendental idealism, we move to further to the science of logic, where we are not simply deducing the contents of the consciousness, but we are going to deduce the categories. And there is, but then somebody would say, but after all, that's what Kant was after, looking after. It was Kant after for deducing the categories. But Hegel says that the Kantian deduction is like a rhapsody. That is to say, one thing is deduced than the other. And Hegel is trying to show that the three major categories of substantiality, causality, and reciprocal action are not simply deductible one after the other, but they are going up and up in a logical way. In the substantiality, the two terms of the relationship are in a kind of asymmetry and inequality. The accident is very minimal beside the substance, and the substance is like Kronos, the god, who after his wife gave birth to their children, he swallowed them. They could not give them reality. In the substantiality, the accidents are swallowed by the substance, they are just superficial. In the second category, the intelligibility and the symmetry of the terms are growing. Cause and effect, the cause and the effect, both of them are original realities. Better, the effect comes out of the cause, but once came out of the cause, it is not going to back. Contrarily to the accident, which is falling back into the substance, which swallows it, the effect remains original outside. The cause is a mother who is not like Kronos swallowing the baby, but giving it existence to it, yet there is an asymmetry in the sense that the cause preserves, conserves its priority in time and its priority of meaning. The cause determines the effect even though it cannot be undone. But the perfect symmetry happens in reciprocal action. In the reciprocal action, the two terms are not asymmetrical, they are moving like this. Whatever this A is doing A is doing B. In the reciprocal action does not remain anything dark, anything unexpressed. Hegel was the philosopher of the surface, but he wanted to destroy superficiality. I mean thereby that Hegel wanted to do away with the notion of the substrate. The substrate means that whenever we are thinking, something remains like the sensory manifold in Kant, which remains like a dark, closed, underlying thing. It's Freudian, it's Kantian. No, Hegel thinks that in a reciprocal action, everything is on the surface. The depth is on the surface, everything is clear. And that is expressed by two famous sentences of Hegel, two slogans which the Hegel readers without knowing repeat. One is, the real is rational and the rational is real, and the perfect content is the perfect form. What does it mean? Hegel says that true metaphysics, that is to say Hegelian metaphysics, true Hegelian metaphysics, in true philosophy, we cannot allow, we should not allow anything real which would remain non-rational. Whatever is real is rational. It's very profound because it does not simply mean that whatever is meaningful, but it also means that Leibniz was right, that there is a kind of instinct of the essences which try to be realized. So there is an inner drive in rationality to get incarnated and to become real. In Hegel, at least on the level of the concept, nothing dark remains, everything is clear. There is light. In a different concept, you remember Hegel says that before man there has been light during the day, but man makes light out of the day, out of the night. Of course, Hegel did not know modern street lighting, yet he already knew that that simply burning a candle or burning an oil lamp, now later electricity, meant that light becomes a 24 hours thing. That means that everything becomes meaningful, everything remains, everything is so well grounded. True foundation is, there is a text in Racine. Lucien Goldman said that in the Racine plays, when something comes very important, the heroes sit down. When I begin to be excited about what I'm saying, and I stand up, that's the main difference between Fedra and me. In Hegelian philosophy, no darkness is supposed to remain, everything is to be understood. That's the meaning of the encyclopedia. In the encyclopedia, logic, nature, history, everything remains. That is very, in a way, it's very unpleasant and very tough because everything is here. And in Hegel also says perhaps very profoundly in aesthetics. In aesthetics, Hegel, there was a big discussion this time whether in true art, there should be a superiority of the form, of the content, and so on. And Hegel said, in true art, there is an identity or a similarity or an affinity of the form on the content. He says the perfect form implies a perfect content. And he is right. In the great art, Marioni says in Le Visible et l'Invisible that the true painting, everything becomes visible. In the great art, the great artist, the great painter is the one in whose painting everything becomes visible. We are before a great work of art, you don't have to ask what did he mean by this painting. He did not mean anything. He painted, and if you begin to mean what on hell he could have meant, that's very bad. It's a bad painting. In a good painting, there is no darkness left. Everything became visible. Everything is on the surface. That means manifestation and revelation. But that was magnificent, and the trouble is that very shortly after the death of Hegel, this thing began to collapse. Not in the sense that people showed that the deductions were unclear, but simply people felt that some bite was missing, and Schelling, in his old age, took up the position of criticizing Hegel, saying the following: Hegel is perfectly right in the science of logic, deducing one after the other the categories. You might remember that, you are supposed to know, even if you don't, and if not, that in the science of logic, every single metaphysical category, from being to essence and to causality and quality and so on, are deduced and shown as meaningful and following up each other. The logic begins with being and comes becoming and so on. The sheerest and the simplest is being, and in a certain sense, the concepts and the essences have a kind of instinct which makes them grow, and everything is a marvelous system. Nothing, I think the most beautiful philosophical treatise is the logic of Hegel. It's magnificent, and it's much, by the way, it's easier than the phenomenology, it's clear and so on, but that's personal. And Schelling says, okay, that's true. There's one major problem there. It is so in the mind, but what is the relationship of this as pure system of essences to effectivity and to reality? Hegel has shown that the mind, the Geist, the philosophical mind, the thinking are perfectly able to handle with all their contexts. At the end, the logic of Hegel is very much, you remember, what is the last, how does the second edition of the encyclopedia, what is the last text? Any Hegel reader remembers? What is the text Hegel is closing the second and the third edition of the encyclopedia? With the Lambda, the text of Aristotle, which is God is thinking on thinking. That is to say, it's perfect thinking. It does not say that God is. God is defined by Aristotle as thinking on thinking. And that is the final text of the encyclopedia. And Schelling understands this by saying that the encyclopedia is perfect thinking, but it has not been able to jump over reality. And it is not a hazard that many of the existentialist thinkers of the 20th century would return to Schelling for inspiration, because Schelling said the following thing. He makes a difference between negative and positive philosophy. The negative philosophy is the Hegelian system and his own system of use, the perfect logic. But when the mind deduces all the contents, and from the simplest to the highest, from the elementary, the most complex, then it has to realize that it has been able to mediate all contents, but not his own existence, not his own existing rationality, which thinks those things. Then what the mind has to do? The mind has to humiliate itself and has to, in a way, fall down before being, before not being the tame, civilized, and educated and conceptual being of the medievals, but before sheer barbarian being. In the different lectures now come out now, the Schellingian posterity, there are texts talking about the barbarian character of being and the wildness of being, because in Schelling calls the being before the mind has to humiliate itself and recognize that he understands everything, but he does not understand being, and he does not understand its own being. Schelling calls this being das Unvordenkliche, which the correct correction is, whatever Gabriel Marcus thinks about this, not immemorial, but how do you say in English? Impensable. How would you say in English? In French they say imprépensible. How would you translate into English?
Unimaginable.
Pardon?
Unimaginable.
No. Yes and no, because the word you are okay about the unimaginable. What matters is that he would like to show that this cannot be thought before. He would like to say that being cannot be deduced. Being is looming around the horizon, something which you cannot handle, which you cannot imagine ahead, you cannot think it out, it has no structure to me. And then Schelling says, however, we at least try to go farther. And then, yes, being cannot be in a first moment, being cannot be thought out, understood, deduced a priori, but being cannot be understood ex post facto. And then comes a very strange and very fantastic structure, a kind of construction of Schelling. Schelling says that we have the hypothesis, we cannot prove, when we face being in an elementary, primitive way, we are overpowered by the sheer greatness of being, which we cannot move around. We cannot go behind the back of being. Being has no back. Being has nothing. Being is just there around. It is the absolute Dasein. It is there, but perhaps we can have a hypothesis and we can look at the world, how the world operates, and then perhaps we can find that this being has a meaning. Schelling calls God, being can called God not ex a priori but ex post facto. He says, if the results for Schelling, reality has two major parts, nature and history. He thinks that the doctrine of the great metaphysical logic of the science of logic and his own negative philosophy are able to give a deduction of history, a deduction of things of nature, and a deduction of things of history. Echo a meaning, but this meaning cannot be, they can be explained ex post facto. We cannot deduce that being is so. We can simply say, if in fact in nature and history a meaningfulness came around, even though original being is a sheer, overpowering, wild, meaningless, essenceless actuality, if we can prove that reality in an a posteriori way, if we can observe that the history of nature and the history of society and history of man displays a certain rationality and certain meaningfulness, then if it is the case, then we can ex post facto say that the being which is wild and sheer actuality is also meaningfulness. It's very interesting because it is what I could say a turned upside down ontological proof. In the ontological proof, we are deducing from God's being, God's essence, God's being. And Schelling tried to deduce out of being the essence. Schelling, because God is the essence of being, for Schelling, God is the meaningfulness of being. Being is God. We cannot say immediately that being is meaningful. We can simply find out that being should be meaningful if empirically we find out that the world is meaningful, nature is meaningful, and history is meaningful. How does it come to I have only a few more minutes to tell you. Hope, it's one of the major virtues in theology. Hope that is going to be in a few minutes. We are going to be over, because I would like to show how this grounding as a new moment, how this Schelling gives a new moment in foundation, and how German idealism, generally spoken, takes up in a highest speculative and conceptual level foundation. In the classical systems of Greek philosophy, Platonical, Aristotelian, and medieval philosophies, the questioning is about essence and being, infiniteness and absoluteness. That is to say, the question is located in the realm of the ultimate and the absolute. The first shift takes place not with Kant, but with Descartes. The cogito, in the cogito, the shift is that even though God is the ground of the ego, epistemologically, we have to go out of the ego to find God and being. And in Kant, the shift becomes more radical because in cogito, the transfer, the shifting to the subjectivity is only provisory and pragmatical. At the end, we find again infiniteness, and the thought after the cogito is over, we are reaching the infiniteness, and the infinity is going to found the cogito, so we found again absolute being. With Kant, Descartes is in a certain sense was a philosopher of the restoration of ontology. I don't know, I think I'm glad that my friend Jean-Luc Marion is not here. He might know better, but I might be wrong. Anyway, nobody's going to, I have a position of very strong one, so no, I'm going not to oppose to it. So in a century, the situation is changing, and ultimateness is put into brackets. In the Critique of Pure Reason, ultimateness is put in brackets, but this bracketing was a very short thing. Kant died in 1804, and Hegel's first Jena text began to be written at that time. The first fragments are 1804, 1805, and Schelling systems, ontology, are 1801, 1802. Well, it means that with German idealism, metaphysics, the interest of a founding principle are in the very core of human thinking, and German idealism is, though for a while, compromising the absoluteness of the claim, putting into the shackles of the theory of knowledge. At the end, the absolute comes out stronger and more living and more than ever before. Of course, it is not yet the case with Kant. In Kant, modesty, Kant was a modest philosopher. I remember Kierkegaard is saying, Schelling saying the same, we should return to the humble and modest ways of Kant. But of course, German idealism is not modest in Hegel, and we are going beyond to finite subjectivity, and in a certain sense, Kantian criticism receives some congratulation and acknowledgement in Hegel, but on the whole, it is a very drastic and cruel refutation of Kantian modesty. The grounding is so strong and heavy that it is all around. In the medieval and antique philosophy, the grounding was universal, took place in being, but was not all over. In Hegel, grounding is all over. In Hegel, the spirit is all around, in a certain sense. So grounding all over. and the identity of the real and the rational are object of a perfect demonstration. Yet in the final phase of idealism, German idealism, in the late Schelling, the rationalistic imperialism of the encyclopedia is put into question. Schelling confesses in his way the idealistic accomplishment, but Schellingism is also a philosophy of break and opening. The structure of the deduction remains intact and respected, but it is put in a background and shown in its limitation. It is the inarticulate, blind factuality of being which comes to face the mind. And it will be a very complicated and very subtle reading of being that a second chance is given to foundation. I would like to perhaps end on this, that I just mentioned that Schellingian philosophy Schelling has been read by all the major writers from the 20th century. As you know, Heidegger says that one of the three major writings of Western philosophy is the investigation of human freedom. Tillich began his writing with Schelling. Jaspers wrote about Schelling. Gabriel Marcel's first book is a Schelling. The late Merleau-Ponty was reading Schelling. Bloch was reading Schelling. But that is a strange inspiration. We should not be too simplist. The existentialistic protest of the 20th century did not mean that philosophy hoped to do away with concept. No, philosophy did not want to do away with concept. Philosophy wanted simply to show that being should be in some way integrated into the conceptuality, and at the same time it should be taken, we have to admit that the reintegration of being into conceptuality gives the prize of a recognition of the opacity and the absoluteness of something unheard of. In a certain sense, German idealism, that's my thesis, in Kant, in Schelling, despite the very theological aspect of it, became to the Kantian ground, that is to say, to a limited affair. To an affair when the sensory manifold and remains, the pathological elements remain in the moral subject, and a certain unconceptuality continues to prevail in aesthetics. I think in a certain sense, I would conclude on it, the problem of foundation means in what sense and to what extent reason can assert its way, at the same time recognizing its other, not as an enemy, not as a clone of it, you don't say, but something which is a partner, perhaps a spouse or a brother, not a slave, neither a god, but an other who cannot be reduced to non-reality, but could be considered as a partner of reason. Reason has a partner in being, reason has a partner in factuality, and it's a difficult partner, and it has to take care of. It should know in a certain sense that its own other, and the very important to know, to retain the two aspects of this designation. It is other, but is its own other.